Hi, I'm Teresa Coates. I'm the National Educator for Shannon Fabrics, and I'm happy to be here today at Missouri Star Quilt Company, where we are working on the companion project to the Santa hat. We will be making the Santa sack. So we're using the same 2 1-yard cuts, 1 yard of Luxe Cuddle hide and 1 yard of Luxe Cuddle dazzle to make these 2 projects. I'm going to start with the Santa sack. So for this project, we're going to use some of my favorite tools, but we're going to need a couple of extra things. In particular, we're going to need some cording to bring that Santa sack closed. So we've got some clothesline that we're going to use for that today. I've also got my scissors, I have the rotary cutter, the stiletto that I love so much, flower head pins, all of my favorite things. We're going to use them for this project. So these are the tools that we'll be using. So let's get started on our Santa sack. All right, so I've got some fabrics left over from my Santa hat, and I'm going to use those. The first thing I'm going to do is cut out my Luxe Cuddle hide. I need a 36 by 36 inch piece, so I will measure that. There will be a little bit cut out from where we did the Santa hat, so we're just going to measure over to that. In case this is your first project, you want to make sure and wash your red fabric before we get started. So you need to wash that in cold water, low heat dryer, and that will get rid of any of the extra dyes that are in there. Red in particular, in any kind of fabric, can often bleed a little bit, so we want to pre-wash that before we get started. So I'm going to go ahead and measure this. I'm going to leave the selvages on here, and I'm going to measure from the selvage over and get a 36 inch square. So I'll measure my 24 inches and add the 12. Then I'm going to go ahead and do that several times up the length of the fabric, and then I will make those all match. Okay, so I'm going to lay this out. One of the things about working with Cuddle is you want to try to get it laid out as flat as possible when you're working with it, just to make sure that you're getting accurate measurements. Because it's a knit and it's plush, it can easily move on you, and you just want to make sure and stay accurate. So again, I'm going to measure from the selvage edge, mark a little dot for the 12 or for the 24 inches, and then measure over 12 more. Go ahead and mark that. I'm going to mark this twice more with the 36 inches. And against that top edge, and if we need to straighten this up, we absolutely can. We're going to measure it, make sure that it's fairly straight. So I'm going to do it from the selvage edge. I'm going to go ahead and draw a straight line here so I can straighten that up. Mark where my 24 is, measure over another 12, and continue with that straight line across the top. All right. So then I'll go ahead and twist this so I can mark and make all of these match where I've measured 36 inches across, and then I will just line these up with my ruler. Draw another straight line. So when I'm working with Cuddle, I really do like to draw all of my lines and cut them. It's easier than trying to measure and cut. It's very easy to get your ruler to not stay exactly where you want it to. And if you're cutting it with a rotary cutter, you're much more likely to make a mistake in the cutting that way. So I'm going to go ahead and mark all of these lines and then cut them. And I will cut them with my Karen K. Buckley scissors. I really like them. They're micro serrated, so they cut the fabric really well. We're just going to go ahead, slide it underneath the back of the fabric, and cut right along the backing. We're going to follow all of these lines and cut out a nice big 36 by 36 inch square. Give my fabric a little shake. Now I'll put this to the side and we'll cut out the white fabric. So the Luxe Cuddle Dazzle is really fun because it has this little bit of sparkle to it, which is just a I can addition, and I really love the way that it catches the light. I think it's super fun. So we're gonna cut out a 10 by 36 inch piece of this. I'm gonna go ahead and use the area that I cut my other pieces out of. Let's see if I've got enough here, and I do. Fabulous. So I've got just the tiniest bit extra here. So I'm going to measure this and cut that off so that it is 36-inch length. Seam straight across the bottom, so put a little mark at 24. Add the 12. Oh, it's just the tiniest little bit. Fabulous. All right, then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to measure 10 inches up. Do that a couple times and again make my lines match. Okay, and then I'm going to double check this to make sure that I've got my 36-inch length. All right. Okay, so now I've got my band. Fold up my extras again. Put those to the side. I can use these for a later project. All right, so now I've got my 36-inch square and my 10 by 36-inch band. And I'm going to sew these together. I'm going to make sure that my nap is going the right direction. So I can kind of pet this, make sure that that is the smoother side. It is indeed. I'm going to go ahead and put a little arrow for myself to make sure that I note that that's the way my nap is going. Do the same thing here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and feel this. Just kind of pet it and see which way I feel like it's going a little bit smoother. I'm going to say it's that direction. And I will tell you, to be honest, if you can't tell a difference, it's absolutely fine. It doesn't matter. You mostly want to make sure that you're doing it lengthwise and not widthwise, because widthwise has stretch and lengthwise does not have stretch. So you want to make sure that you are sewing them together stretchy side to stretchy side, and the nap isn't quite as important as the actual stretch of it. That said, I will usually mark it. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and I'm going to lay my bag or my sack fabric out here. So I'm going to lay the sack fabric out, lay that out nice and smooth. I'm going to put my band fabric at the top. So this is how I want it to be sewn together. I can look and I can see, because this is a very similar nap between the two, I can see that it goes this direction. It works out. I'm going to fold it right sides together. And I'm going to pin it by matching my corners first. I'm going to go ahead and pin that in sort of at a 45-degree angle. I'll do the other corner. And then I'll find the center. And then start double pinning all the way across. So I'm going to pin parallel to this raw edge, keeping these edges nice and even. So I'm going to pin this first row about 1/4 of an inch or so from the raw edge, making sure that I'm catching both layers. And I'm going to pin it parallel because it will keep it a little bit flatter as I go. And I do want to make sure that I'm carefully pinning this edge because it's the stretchy direction. So this is the direction that the fabric will stretch. So if not careful in pinning this to keep it in control, this is where I could get a little bit of stretch happening, and I don't want that. So I'm going to pin a bunch once all the way across. Like I said, about 1/4 of an inch or so, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to pin in between that and double pin one level down. So I'm kind of going to pin in almost a zigzag fashion, so it'll kind of go like this, and it'll keep all of those areas nice and flat. This second row I want to pin about an inch away. And I'm hoping that if I pin it correctly, I can leave it as I'm sewing to keep the fabric under control. I'll show you that in just a second. So one more pin in there. All right, so now I've got the whole thing pinned. I'm going to go ahead and take it to the sewing machine, sew it with a 1/2 inch seam allowance with a straight stitch. I've got the machine set up. So I've got it on a straight stitch here with a 3.5 stitch length, just a straight stitch, and with the walking foot. And those are the most important things. It's important that you lengthen your stitch a little bit. It'll make it a lot easier for you to sew. So I've got my machine set up here with a straight stitch, a 3.5 stitch length. So I've opened up that stitch length just a little bit to make it easier to sew. And then I've got my walking foot on here with the 9014 stretch needle and polyester thread. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to put this in here. It's a 1/2 inch seam allowance that we're going to use, and I'm really going to use kind of the edge of my foot as that 1/2 inch. I'm going to bring it underneath the foot completely, put my foot down, take my first pin out, then do a little back stitch to secure that seam. Then I'll go forward and stitch these together. Now as I get to these areas where I've double pinned, if the pin isn't going to get stitched over, I'm not going to hit it with my needle, I'm going to leave it there to secure that fabric. And I'm just going to stitch all the way across. And as I reach the other end, I'm going to slow down, make sure I do a little back stitch, secure that well, go ahead and clip my thread. So I've got the seam sewn all the way across. I can take out my second row of pins. I held it nice and tight while I was sewing. That worked out great. You can see how nicely that sews and how that it doesn't allow the cuddle to kind of stretch as you go. So if you've struggled with that at all, the double pinning is a great technique to use. So now that I've got the band sewn on here, I'm going to go ahead and sew these together the long way. So we're going to match the side seam. So we're going to match up where these join right here. And I'm going to go ahead and kind of fold back. I can see where they're matching, and I'm going to pin that. And then I'll match the corner up here. And the other corner at the bottom. So I'm not going to care too much if these sides are matching perfectly. Should be pretty close that if we pin this, we'll be able to lay it out and it'll all match fine. Okay. So pull this out. I'm going to go ahead and pin in the center and then pin in between again. So I'm going to pin one section at a time to get that nice and secure. And then we'll do each one of these sections and sew it. All right, so as I get up here, I need to make sure and mark it so that I can leave a turning hole for the cording that I will put in here later. So the first mark I'm going to do is at a 1/2 inch, and I'm going to go ahead and mark that with my pen. So a 1/2 inch down from where the seam is. I'm going to mark that underneath there. And then I'm going to go ahead and mark again 2 inches down, which should give me a 1.5 inch gap in between. So I'm also, while I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to mark this 2 inches down from my seam line in several places, because I'll be referencing this later. Okay. So I'm going to put 2 pins in here. Nope. Get rid of my threads. Okay, so I'm going to put 2 pins in right here where I want to start and stop sewing, because this is going to be my opening for the channel. So I put 2 pins in, and this is just my personal way of being able to note that this is where I need to start and stop. So then I'll go ahead and put the double pins in for the rest of it. Okay, we'll do that for the top as well, for this little section. Put this up on the table. Whenever I'm working with Cuddle, I try to keep as much on the table as possible because the weight of it will want to pull it and kind of distort it as you're pinning or sewing. So make sure you do that. Okay, so I've got it all pinned. Now, before I get any further and forget, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to transfer these marks to the other side as well, 2 inches down from my seam allowance. So I can just kind of fold that back, get it nice and even under there, and go ahead and put some little lines to measure that 2 inches. Okay, and this will just give me a guide for a step that's coming. Okay, all right. So then I'm going to sew, or I'm going to pin across the bottom as well, and we'll be able to sew that in one long seam. All right, now that I've got it all pinned, I'm going to take it over to the sewing machine, sew it with a straight stitch. We're going to sew down the side and across the bottom, leave a little hole for the channel. Okay, so again, I'm going to start in just a little bit, put my foot down, make sure I can get that pin out. So I'm going to go ahead and put the foot down, take that pin out, and I can put my needle in, back stitch just a little, and then go ahead and sew down this side. So again, I'm just using the edge of my foot for a guide to keep it at about a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I'm going to sew right down here to that second, or to the first set of 2 pins. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and try to push these seam allowances up. I'm going to use my stiletto to keep those in position. And that's really just so I can kind of see better where it is that I'm sewing. So as I get closer, I'm going to take those pins out. I'm going to back stitch a couple of stitches. So then I'm just going to stop here. I will cut my thread. And then I'll start again at this second set of pins. Slide that underneath my foot, get that into position. So I'll slide that in, get it in position, put my foot down, take my pins out, put my needle down, and then I'm going to go ahead and go forward and backward a couple of times to secure that start of the seam. So I'm going to back stitch, and I'll go forward and stitch the rest of this seam. So as I work my way down the side here, I keep a hand in the back and a hand in the front, and it's really just to kind of guide the fabric through in a straight line, and also to make sure that the walking foot is doing its job. So I kind of keep a hand right back here. I'm not tugging on it, not pulling on it hard, just sort of guiding it through the machine. So as I get up here to the corner, I'm going to go ahead and slow down. I'm going to do a little back stitch at the corner just to secure it. And then we're going to lift the foot and pivot, sew along the bottom. I'm going to back stitch this side as well, just to really secure that corner. Sew right along here. Again, we're going to back stitch and secure that. All right. So now I've got my pins, my leftover double row of pins. I'm going to take all of those out. All right, so now that I've got the pins out, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna box the corners. So really boxing the corners, what it does is instead of having a nice square bottom at the, well, instead of having a nice square here at the bottom of the bag, it's actually gonna bring it so it's a little more 3D. So it's not as flat, it'll give it some shape. So what I wanna do is fold it so that my seams are matching on either side, which I can really feel more than you can see. And I'm gonna go ahead and I'm going to pin this so that it stays there. Then I'm gonna measure it to make sure that it's the right size. So I'm gonna use my ruler and I'm just going to measure from where I can feel the corner is. Okay, so I've measured 2 inches in from the corner, from where the seam allowances meet here, down the seam allowance. I'm gonna keep this line on the seam allowance, and then I wanna make sure that it's pretty even. So if I look at this, from here to here is 2 inches, and from here to here is 2 inches. So I'm gonna draw my line right across here, make sure that it is a nice square corner. Okay, so now I've got that line on there, and that's where I'm gonna stitch. Because I really don't want this to move, I'm actually gonna pin on both sides of this, and sew in between on that line. I'm gonna go ahead and do that with both corners. This corner is gonna be a little bit different because I don't have the seam line, because this one is just done on the fold. So I'm gonna go ahead and put a pin here to kind of mimic where that is. Get these to match up, my seam here and my pin. And again, do the same thing, kind of pin in here, just to hold it in position so that I can measure it. I'll lay that out. I can feel where the end of my seam is. I'm going to measure that 2 inches in. Make sure that it's about 2 inches from either end, or from measure 2 inches in from this end, and then about 2 inches up on either side. Make sure that it's fairly square. And then I'll mark that line with my Sharpie. Then a pin on either side of that line to keep that in position as I'm sewing. All right, so I've still got the machine set on a straight stitch, and I'm just going to take this over here and sew it across on the lines that I drew. We're going to back stitch, go forward. Again, I'm going to use my stiletto here to kind of guide the fabric, keep it down underneath the foot, go across and back stitch again. I can take my pins out and we'll do the other corner. So now we've got both corners boxed so that they'll create a nice flat corner and more of a 3D shape for our sack. So I'm going to go ahead and trim these off. I'm going to leave about 1/2 of an inch for the seam allowance. Just trim this carefully and throw those away. All right, so now we're gonna go ahead and I'm gonna take the band and I'm gonna bring it over and we're gonna create that channel using those marks that I made earlier. So this is kind of gonna get folded so that they're wrong sides together. And we're gonna work on this just a little bit at a time to make sure that it stays where we want it to. So first I'm gonna open up my seam allowances here and I'm gonna get these to match in here. And it's gonna go just barely past where I left my turning gap. So I'm going to kind of pin that open, or hold that open, and I'm going to pin in place here. Now as I work my way around, I have the 2 layers underneath, so I need to be careful as I'm pinning, so I'll constantly be kind of checking it, making sure that I've got it in the right place. Okay. Go ahead and pull that up just a tiny bit. And what I want to do is get this, the edge of the white fabric here to match up with the black marks that I've made. So I'm going to kind of pull them just a little bit, and then I'll go ahead and put a pin in here. So to avoid pinning through both layers and to make it a little bit flatter for me to pin, I'm going to go ahead and use my ruler. Just kind of slide it between the layers where I need to pin to keep it flat in there. Now I'll be able to go ahead and stick the pin in and secure it. I'll just slide my ruler down, make sure I'm getting it in the right position. And then while I'm here, I'm going to add that second row of pins. We're going to want to secure that really well before we stitch around it. And again, I'm just going to move the ruler along in here to give me a flat spot to pin against. Now I can twist this whole thing. I'll do just a section at a time. Get that pin back in there. So I'll do this section and then twist it some more to do the last of it. So just kind of work through making sure that the fabric stays as flat as possible. All right, so again, matching up the edge of my white band fabric with the marks that I made. In the previous step, when I marked it 2 inches down from the seam line, that's what we're using now to secure this, make sure that it stays in the right position. Move my ruler down, do the same thing. Okay, we'll twist it and get that last little bit secured. So move my ruler over so I've got a flat surface in between. And my seam allowance is up in here and it's kind of just opening up, and that's absolutely fine. It does not need to go one direction or another. It's just going to kind of be loose in there for right now. All right, one more down here. Another up here. Okay, so I need to take this to the machine, and I just realized that I've put in all of my pins so that they're actually going to be harder to take out. I should have pinned it the other direction. So let me explain really quickly, and then I'm going to fix my pins. When I take this to the machine, I want to make sure that my pins are going to be able to come out, and the way that I've pinned them right now, the heads are further away and they need to be closer to me. So I'm going to go ahead and repin this and then meet you at the machine. So I've gone ahead and I repinned only that first side. So let me show you really quick. So my first pins are going this direction and my pins on this side are going this direction. This was the wrong way, but since those are going to be on the inside and I shouldn't have to remove them, I'm going to leave them over here. Now again, this is a place that if you have a free arm, go ahead and take that off. I'm just going to move this over so that I'm going to be sewing right along the very edge of this fabric. All right, so I'm going to put it in. I'm going to switch my stitch to a zigzag. And again, I'm going to go up to a big zigzag, which is a 4 on this machine. So 4 wide, 4 long. And like I said, I like to just do them as kind of a square. So it's just generally how I do it. It doesn't have to be the same on both, but it's generally how I do it. I'm going to start here, and I am going to secure it with a zigzag. You could do a straight stitch, but the zigzag is better. All right, so I'm just going to put my needle down, make sure that my foot is down, and I'm going to zigzag so that I'm catching this whole edge. So I'm going to try to make sure to hit either just past this raw edge or just the very edge of it and keep that nice and secure and stitch all the way around. Okay, and I'm going to kind of keep a little bit of tension on this just in the front, just to keep it flat as it's sewing, to make sure that it goes where I want it to. I'm going to be extra careful because I've got a lot of pins in this. As I get close to this and I've got my pins in here, I'm going to go ahead and take them out. Make sure that I'm not stitching over any of them. And then I'm just going to stitch all the way around. All right, so now once I've gotten it sewn all the way around, I'm going to take it out of my machine, clip my threads, and we're going to go back and take out all of those extra pins. So one of the things that I really love about the clover pins is how strong they are. One of the other things that I don't love so much is that they will sometimes hide in here. So I kind of wanted to show you this with the white pins. I used them and I knew that they were going to be a little bit of trouble for me just because they like to hide in there. So if you want to be extra careful, make sure to use the colorful ones. They'll be much easier to make sure that you find them, because the plush fabrics do love to hide everything, including any stitches you do wrong, but also pins that are white heads. Okay, let's see if we got them all. Kind of do a gentle little double check here. All right, we got them. Go ahead and trim my threads. All right, and now from this side we can see that stitching goes all the way around. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stitch a little bit further up to try to create that channel. I'm going to do it from this side just to show you that we can. Okay, we're going to want to do that 1.5 inches above where we were. So what I really want to do is just make sure that this is pulled nice and tight. So I'm kind of going to do the same thing that I did before. I'm going to slide my ruler in here and pin behind it. Okay, because we're doing 2 layers of, or two channels here. So the 1.5 inches should be just a little bit below this stitching line. So if I stitch about 1/2 inch away from the seam where these join, it should create the channel that I want. This channel guide is 1.5 inches is what the guideline is. If it ends up being a little bit less, it really isn't going to be a big deal, because we're not trying to get something to fit exactly in there. It's a little bit loose right now, so you have some freedom of movement. But it's not perfect. And I'm going to go ahead and try to stick with my green pins, because I can already see those white ones disappearing on me. Okay. Do the same thing that I did before, and make sure to give this a little tug, make sure that they match here. All right, we're just going to do 1 row of pins in here, and I'm kind of doing it right basically along the seam line, because I don't need to secure quite as much. As long as I secure it there, it's going to work out just fine. But I do want to make sure that it's being, both layers are being brought out and that they're staying even, and I'm not getting any puckers on the back. It's partly why I want to sew it on the front this time, is just to make sure that the outside looks as nice as I want it to. Get a couple more pins. And this doesn't match up perfectly there, and I'm okay with it. I bet if I do a little bit of fluffing, it'll match even better. Okay. All right, 1 more in here. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take this to the sewing machine, and we're going to sew all the way around here. All right. So again, I'm going to do a zigzag stitch on this, and really you could do a straight stitch if you wanted to. The reason I chose to do a zigzag is it will give it a little bit more stretch. So as I work my way around here, this will have a little bit more give because this is the stretch of the fabric, and the zigzag will give it a little bit more give more than a straight stitch would. So if this is going to be used and it's going to be opened up a bunch, and I could see kids playing with this in kind of rough ways, we want to give it a stitch that will have a little bit more flexibility. So I'm just going to stitch right along here, kind of overlapping almost the seam line just below it. Work our way around. All right, so we've worked our way all the way around, again, creating a little channel in here. Clip my threads. We've got our little opening in the side that we'll be able to use to put our cording in there. So let me go ahead and trim up some of my seams. So before I do that, I'm going to fluff some of the stitches here out of the zigzag so we can show how to kind of hide those seams so you won't even notice it. And especially once you get the cording in there and pull it tight, you'll never see these stitches. So even though it seems a little obvious at this point and the zigzag kind of sits on top, it's really easy here to just fluff up the fibers and get it to hide. All right, so now I've kind of fluffed up all of my edges, made sure it looks a little bit neater, and now I'm going to go ahead and add the cording. So I'm going to need 1.5 yards of cording of some type. I'm using just clothesline today, and I'm going to cut that. We're going to cut it at 1.5 yards, and then we'll trim it down as we want to. All right, and you are welcome to use whatever you want. You could actually use a really cute like cotton and make a little band out of it. You could do all sorts of things to find some fancy cording. I'm going to go ahead and measure it on the mat here. So there's 1.5 yards. Okay, I'm going to knot this so that I can try to put my little safety pin in here. So put a little knot. See if we can get that to stay in there all the way around. That 1.5 inch channel is nice and big, so you should be able to get things through it pretty darn easily. So sometimes I know when I'm putting cording through things, sometimes it can be a little bit hard if the channel is too small, but this one is pretty big. Let's see if I can get the thing through. There we go. All right. So now once I've got my safety pin onto the cording, I'm gonna try to find the hole in the side. There it is. One of the things that I love about Cuddle is it just kind of hides, so it's really easy to not be able to see it. You can also see I was able to fix my seams where they didn't quite match up. They look like they do now. I'm just going to go ahead and tuck this in here, and we're going to bring this all the way around. I'm going to see how this works. So I'm just going to kind of gather it up a little bit as I go. So I push it onto the safety pin that I can feel in there, and then I'll grip the safety pin real well and then pull the fabric down so that it feeds through the channel really nicely. Okay, so just kind of build a little bit up on the safety pin, give it a tug. Do that all the way around. right, so now I pull those, get it nice and even, get it turned inside out. Got my boxed corners here. So we'll sit nice and flat, basically. Fill it up with toys. Give it a tug shut. And there you go. You've got yourself a little Santa sack. Perfect for keeping those presents away from the kids before Christmas morning. And a great little decor item. Thank you so much for joining me here at Missouri Star. We'll see you next time. Happy sewing.
Hi everybody, it's Jenny from the Missouri Star Quilt Company. We hope you enjoyed watching this video. If you aren't already part of the Missouri Star Quilt Company family, be sure to subscribe so you won't miss a thing. And if you click that bell, it'll notify you every time a new tutorial comes out. See you next Friday.